Mr. Speaker, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Our meditation this morning comes from Psalms 1. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Meditation is a means of contemplation and reflection, which generally involves spending time alone and in quietness in order to draw close to God. The person of God himself is seen as a proper object of meditation, especially in relation to his beauty and faithfulness. Scripture also emphasizes the importance of meditation on the Word of God as a means of deepening believers' understanding and appreciation of God. The Word of God is thus seen not simply as a source of moral or spiritual instruction, but as a channel through which a person encounter with the person of and will of God may take place. Results of such meditation include a deepened obedience to God, great understanding and wisdom, a growing delight in the law and confidence in faith. Honorable members, the instructions and benefits in Psalms 1, not only for men, but for women as well. Yea, for every person who has reached the age of accountability shall be praying. Heavenly Father, how grateful we are for the opportunity that prayer provides to find grace and mercy in our times of need. For your law is perfect, O Lord, converting the soul, making wise the simple. Teach us thy statutes, that our eyes may be enlightened, for your judgments are true and righteous. Let us decide them above silver and gold. For by your words we are warned, and in keeping your commandments there is great reward. Show us the error of our ways, and reveal our secret sins, O Lord. Let them not have dominion over us. Cause us to walk uprightly toward our neighbors. For all the law is fulfilled in this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But if we bite and devour one another, we shall be consumed one of another. So let your words always be gracious, O Lord. 1 year has passed since our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Honorable Peter Tynquest, gave us a report of the financial state of our nation and presented his budget for the ensuing year. We verily believe that there is evidence to suggest that our nation is on the road to recovery financially, and our best years are ahead of us. But we cannot rest on our laurels. We the people must continue to pray and to hold up our leaders in prayer and to do what Psalms 1 instructed us to do. We thank you for the unity which exists between our government and opposition members. And it is in this unity that the blessing of God shall continue to fall upon our nation. Psalms 133 says, how good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Minnis, Cabinet Ministers, backbenchers, and honorable members on the opposition side, be encouraged. God is on our side, and all is well. Therefore, we ought to give Almighty God the praise and thanks which he rightfully deserves. You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. Honorable members and all who are in the sound of my voice, together we pray. Our Father, in heaven, be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a wonderful day.
Dr. Hubert Minnis, Peter Turnquest, Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Renwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Ding, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio Diagula, Michael Quintard, Darren Henfield, Romuald Ferreira, Lanisha Rose, Renzo Rose, Elsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Ron Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edgecombe, Hiram Lewis, Carlton Boleg, James Aubrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Humes, Michael Folk, Miriam Reckley Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Reuben Ramming, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Don Cartwright, Shawnell Ferguson, Glennis Hannah Martin, Faisal Forbes, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, as we embark on this new fiscal period for our nation, as a former meteorologist and forecaster, I can tell you that after making your analysis, reviewing all of your data, you would give your expectation or your prognosis of what is likely to occur. The good book tells us that faith is the substance of the fall and the evidence of things unseen. And so, honorable members, as we proceed, we hold faith that the projections, forecasts will become seen and materialize within this fiscal period. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the City of Nassau Revitalization Extension of Time Order 2018.
Thank you. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Family Island Development Encouragement Extension of Time Order 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Customs Management Amendment Regulation 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Business License Amendment Regulation 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Value Added Tax Amendment Regulations 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Central Bank of the Bahamas 2017 Annual Report and Statement of Accounts for the year 31st December 2017.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Bank of the Bahamas Limited Annual Report for the year 2017.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Gaming House Operators Amendment Regulations 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member. The honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Police Fees for Service Amendment Regulations 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Tugs and Tender Fees Amendment Order 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Ship and Port Facility Security Amendment Regulations 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Price Control General Amendment Number 2 Regulations 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Ordered that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lie on the table the Immigration Fees Amendment Regulations 2018.
Ordered that the document be brought up. Ordered that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I beg leave to lay on the table the Bahamas Nationality Amendment Regulations 2018.
Ordered that the document be brought up. Ordered that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Grand Bahama Port Area Investment Incentives Extension of Time Applications Number 2, Order 2018.
Ordered that the document be brought up. Ordered that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bamboo Town.
There are none, Mr. Speaker.
Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I rise this morning on behalf of the wonderful and hard-working Bahamian people, and more particularly, the people of East Grand Bahama, in whose honor and privilege I am here to serve today. Mr. Speaker, today we traveled from the Cabinet Office to this honorable chamber with a red briefcase. And in 3 years, we intend to change the color of that briefcase to black. Indicating that we have moved from deficit spending to our plan for surplus. We understand, Mr. Speaker, that to achieve this requires discipline and sacrifice. And I will speak to that as we go through. Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to present the 2018-19 budget communication. Mr. Speaker, this is a landmark budget. Indeed, it is arguably the most transformative budget in the history of our nation.
Yes.
It is a budget about finally putting an end to past practices of fiscal mismanagement and instead adopting an approach to the management of the fiscal affairs of the nation in the manner that they should be managed, that is, in a responsible, transparent, and accountable way. To those ends, this budget first ends the past practice of artificially under-budgeting for known commitments and properly accounts for government expenditure such that it truly reflects the cost of current commitments and thereby prevents the buildup of significant expenditure arrears. Secondly, it fully provides for the clearing up of the mountain of arrears and unbudgeted commitments left behind by previous governments that currently totals some $360 million. Third, it provides, through proposed fiscal responsibility legislation, a legally binding framework for responsible fiscal management, as well as effective parliamentary and public scrutiny of the fiscal performance of the government. And fourth, establishes a sound and credible fiscal plan for 2018-2019 fiscal period and beyond that addresses the fiscal pressures that we confront and provides for the implementation of the government's socio-economic growth agenda in a fiscally responsible way, secures the achievement of the proposed legally mandated annual deficit reduction objectives and sets the course towards the legislated long-term goal of reducing the burden of government debt to no more than 50% of GDP. In our first budget last year, I stated that Bahamians had given our government a decisive mandate to bring about the much-needed transformation of both public financial management and our economy in order to secure a better life and future for all Bahamians. Our citizens desperately need and desire strong and decisive leadership that is fully transparent and accountable to the people, that exercises prudent management of their tax dollars, and that encourages and facilitates a growing economy that supports new job growth and a higher standard of living. The Bahamian people gave us an overwhelming mandate to fulfill their aspirations in these areas, and we owe it to them to deliver nothing less. The transformational socio-economic growth agenda that we presented in the 2017 manifesto and the speech from the throne speaks directly to these core national objectives and delineates the specific action plans that we will implement in their pursuit. That is the plan of action that we promised. That is the plan of action that we are pursuing. In this budget, at the one-year mark of our mandate, I will speak frankly to what our government said it would do at this time last year and what has so far been achieved. What further actions we are implementing in core priority areas in the new budget year and our fiscal action plan to address the pressures that we face and to ensure that we meet the mandated fiscal objectives of the proposed fiscal responsibility law. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians have long heard and indeed have come to be skeptical about the words strong leadership, responsibility, transparency, ability, that have been bandied about in recent years as empty slogans and without follow-through, to the point that they have effectively become devoid of meaning. Our predecessors perfected the art with flowery rhetoric, exaggerated adornment, and unrealistic optimism and promises. It is little wonder that in the end, their approach to governance was doomed to failure and the administration to rebuke and rejection. The previous administration talked a good game, but then perennially proceeded to play by its own rules, which meant that there was no responsibility for its actions and no accountability to the Bahamian citizens. Our government will not play by that rule book. Bahamians want to know, indeed, they deserve to know, the truth in respect of the state of and prospects for the national economy and the public finances, as well as what their government plans to do about the challenges that we as a society confront. Mr. Speaker, that is precisely what this vitally important annual document is all about. It is the vehicle through which government informs the people about what it has accomplished during the last year and what it has planned for the upcoming year. It is on the basis of the information and data contained herein that our citizens are in a position to render judgment on their government's performance in delivering good governance, sound financial management, and concrete economic and social advancement of our nation. Mr. Speaker, our government fervently believes in adhering to the true meaning and import of the words strong leadership, responsibility, transparency, and accountability. And in this budget, we will tell it like it is. Quite bluntly, the economic, social, and fiscal challenges that we confront are difficult and daunting. I will not dwell at length yet again on the economic and fiscal damage that was inflicted on our nation during the past administration's 5 years mandate. The consequences are plain enough and painful enough for all to see. I will reiterate, though, that our task has been made all the more difficult by the extent of that damage. I spoke to this matter in the last budget communication in plain language and in unvarnished terms. If we are to achieve the fundamental objectives of our transformational agenda and bring palpable improvements to the lives of Bahamians, it is critically important that we return the public finances to a more sustainable state with sharply lower deficits, eventual balanced budgets, and a reduced burden of government debt. We simply cannot continue the irresponsible practice of piling one yearly deficit on another and further deepening the debt hole of the nation. The unrelenting and damaging deficit and debt spiral must be arrested. Otherwise, interest payments will absorb ever-increasing shares of our revenue dollars, thereby further constraining our ability to fund the much-needed programs, services, and public infrastructure and support that our citizens expect from their government. Going forward, we must articulate and commit to a fiscal framework that caps the size of government to manageable levels, to avoid an unchecked growth in government spending that could over time undermine the economic viability of our country. I was therefore unequivocal in last year's budget communication that we would be judicious and fiscally prudent in the implementation of our ambitious growth agenda, doing so in a manner that will ensure that the annual deficit is steadily reduced and eliminated, thereby gradually returning the burden of debt to lower and more desirable levels. Accordingly, the 5-year policy platform of our government is being implemented in a phased and reasoned way within the budgetary limitations that we face. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to a brief discussion of what the government has achieved to date during its first full year in office and our action plan for the coming year and beyond. Mr. Speaker, our government made a commitment to the Bahamian people that we would enshrine fiscal discipline as a core element of our transformative growth agenda. Putting the nation's fiscal house in order is a clear prerequisite to a more buoyant private sector and stronger job growth, as well as securing sustainable improvements in the standard of living of our citizens. Perennial government deficits and an ever-ballooning burden of government debt pose a direct threat to a better life today and to prospects for future generations. Reflecting the importance that we attach to our commitment in this area, we announced in our very first budget that we would proceed with the elaboration of fiscal responsibility legislation and binding fiscal rules. The draft bill is presently out for public consultation and feedback. The purpose of this legislation will be to establish in law the principles and procedures of fiscal responsibility management, guide the formulation and implementation of fiscal policy objectives, guide the annual budget within a medium-term fiscal framework, and facilitate effective parliamentary and public scrutiny and oversight of fiscal performance. The provisions of the proposed law are structured around the general principles of reasonable fiscal management, namely accountability, responsibility, stability, transparency, intergenerational fairness, and inclusive growth. The specific fiscal responsibility principles incorporated in the law relate to achieving and maintaining a sustainable fiscal balance, achieving and maintaining prudent levels of public debt, and prudently managing fiscal risks. The specific fiscal objectives that have been established to operationalize the core fiscal responsibility principles are set out in the first schedule of the bill. Namely, the long-term debt objective is to reduce debt to no more than 50% of GDP. The fiscal balance is to be reduced to no more than 0.5% of GDP from fiscal years 2020 to 2021 and onward. To allow for a transition to the latter objective, the fiscal balance shall not exceed 1.8% of GDP in 2018-19 and 1% of GDP in fiscal year 2019-2020. And following the attainment of the 0.5% of GDP objective for the fiscal balance, the growth of recurrent expenditure shall not exceed the long-term rate of growth of nominal GDP. The bill provides for mechanisms to enforce its binding fiscal commitments. To that end, an independent fiscal responsibility council is to be established with responsibility for assessing the government's compliance with the general principles, fiscal responsibility principles, and fiscal objectives, and to advise on fiscal and budgetary matters of the government. As an additional enforcement mechanism, the law provides that whenever the government does not comply with the requirements of the fiscal objective, it shall be required to prepare and implement an adjustment plan. Such a plan will need to be tabled in Parliament and forwarded to the Fiscal Responsibility Council, as well as published on the official website of the government. The plan will clearly specify the measures that will be taken to return to compliance with the requirements from the legally mandated fiscal objectives. True participatory government. The stringent fiscal requirements of this legislation are groundbreaking in the affairs of our nation, but are necessary to ensure that no government, including our own, ever repeats the disastrous fiscal experience of the previous administrations. Notwithstanding the fact that the Fiscal Responsibility Bill has not yet been enacted, we have crafted this budget consistent with the key principles and articulated targets as guideposts, underscoring our commitment to the achievement of fiscal discipline and proper governance. Mr. Speaker, in light of the magnitude of the primary fiscal imbalance that we faced upon coming to office, we have, as I mentioned earlier, adopted a judicious and balanced approach to fiscal consolidation that comprises actions to both restrain expenditure and enhance revenues. On the expenditure front, we are pursuing an in-depth and extensive review of all government programs and services. It is simply well past time for such a review to ensure that the administration and delivery of government programs and services are up to the best international standards of the 21st century. Archaic and manual practices and procedures must be replaced in order to better serve the population at appreciably lower cost. As such, beyond contributing to deficit reduction, that review also seeks to enhance value for money, improve services to make them more effective and efficient, and identify savings and reallocations to accommodate our core policy priorities. As an immediate cost-saving measure, all ministries and departments were mandated during this fiscal period to implement a 10% reduction in respect to their discretionary expenditures. As a result, the government's wage bill and purchases of goods and services this fiscal year are projected to be down by $120 million. As a result, the government's wage bill and purchase of goods and services this fiscal year are projected to be down $120 million, or 10.3% from the amount budgeted. For its part, the in-depth review of expenditure is expected to make a significant and permanent contribution to deficit reduction going forward. The government has been in discussions with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, on a project that we refer to as the Digital Bahamas Initiative. The main objective of this project is to foster the country's competitiveness by reducing the cost of conducting business with the government. This general objective will be accomplished by achieving the following specific objectives: streamlining government procedures and making them available online to reduce the cost of government bureaucracy, increasing the use of ICTs in the public sector, and increasing transparency of government activities and strengthening auditing and control mechanisms. These three principal components of the project will focus on simplifying and digitizing government procedures, strengthening institutional capacity for a digital government, and enhancing transparency and integrity in government. As for results, the project is expected to lead to a reduction in the time and cost of government procedures, an increase in the data shared and used across government offices for policy design and government management, an improvement in the quality and quantity of government information published and its use by citizens, and the establishment of a single national identity number and identity card, presumptively using the current NIB ID number, that will allow for ease in transacting business in the public and private spheres of the country. We expect to finalize the details of this new project early in the new fiscal year. The net result of this will be a reduction in the processes and paperwork and the means to conduct government business more efficiently. Simply put, as the private sector and the rest of the world is doing, we will make use of technology to deliver public services cheaper, faster, and better. The government will also provide support to the central bank's current move towards a digital form of Bahamian currency, as well as support the effort of the central bank and the commercial banking sector to move towards a cashless society. Our ambition is no less than to make the Bahamas a regional leader and then a world leader in the utilization of digital technology for the benefits of our citizens. In so doing, we shall catapult the Bahamas ahead of many of its contemporaries and create opportunities and efficiencies for all Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the government is striving to transform its state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, into self-sufficient entities. As was laid out in the budget communication last year, funding in the amount of $429 million was provided for 25 SOEs in the 2017-2018 fiscal year, representing an increase of $79 million from the previous fiscal year. In light of the critical priority being attached to fiscal consolidation, such a drain on the public finances must clearly be rationalized. To that end, the government has directed each state-owned enterprise to begin looking at a move towards a cost recovery operating model, which might include a mix of revenue enhancement initiatives, as well as measures to reduce expenditure in line with industry benchmarks. The SOEs are now formulating articulated strategies that we expect will take them to this optimized point within 3 to 5 years. As a supplement to this exercise, to provide guidance, the government is currently pursuing the engagement of a consulting firm to provide an analysis of selected state-owned enterprises and authorities, and to create a roadmap with respect to best options for these SOEs and authorities becoming self-sustaining entities. Specifically, the work will entail the creation of a detailed strategic approach to cost rationalization and cost recovery for selected SOEs, consistent with global best practices for similar agencies in similar jurisdictions. As well, the contract will call for the development of the modalities to permit suitable government in-house professionals to be able to undertake similar strategic reviews of the remaining SOEs and the requisite training and support of the identified professionals. Mr. Speaker, we are as well pursuing measures to strengthen the accountability and transparency of the Ministry of Finance, including the recent creation of 2 new senior positions within the ministry in the form of a Deputy Financial Secretary with responsibility for strengthening the operational capacity of the ministry and a Deputy Financial Secretary in charge of economics and fiscal policy matters. The latter position is under recruitment and expected to be filled shortly. The ministry will also undertake an internal restructuring and will recruit additional Bahamian professionals so as to ensure that the agency is equipped to provide its optimal level of fiscal, economic, and budgetary management and support. The Ministry of Finance is also pursuing and implementing and successful completion of the $33 million IDB-financed public financial management and performance monitoring reform project that has been floundering up until last year and producing meager tangible results. The objective of this exercise is to enhance the capacity of the ministry to produce high-quality information for evidence-based policy making, as well as improve the ability to better allocate and track public funds. In this regard, the ministry will also work to strengthen its analytical capacity in the area of fiscal policy development and implementation. As well, the ministry is moving to the adoption of new budgeting and accounting software and standards, and the introduction of accrual accounting and the systems that support it. Let me read that again, because there is this commentary that the government has changed its reporting standard. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, the government has not changed its accounting standard last year or from the year before, and it has not changed it again this year. And so I want to make sure our friends on the opposite side understand, because apparently they still don't understand. Mr. Speaker, as well, the ministry is moving to adoption of new budgeting and accounting software and standards, and the introduction of accrual accounting and the systems to support it. Also in development is the implementation of a new, modern chart of accounts that is fully compatible with international standards. As an initial step to avoid the buildup of future arrears, the government is enabling accrual accounting with the planned introduction of International Public Sector Accounting Standards, or IPSIS, for government bookkeeping and reporting that will provide increased visibility into outstanding cash requirements and facilitate cash planning. Here again, we are committed to bringing the Bahamian government up to modern and international standards. The Ministry of Finance has also been mandated to renew its emphasis on enhanced revenue collection. To that end, the Revenue Enhancement Unit, another example of an initiative simply floundering under the previous administration, is being recast to ensure that revenue is properly and fully collected across the major tax types. To facilitate this effort, an amendment is being proposed to the Financial Administration and Audit Act to provide the authority to the Ministry of Finance to form an interdepartmental unit that will be assigned the task of revenue enhancement across the major areas of taxation. In addition, the ministry's revenue policy structure will be reorganized in such a way that officers will be assigned the responsibility for monitoring and analysis of a specific major area of revenue, on the basis of which recommendations are to be formulated for remedial measures that will ensure that revenue objectives are met. We will also re-energize the reform and modernization exercise that has been launched in respect to the major tax areas, such as customs and real property tax. A full management audit of customs procedures and processes will be undertaken to determine the extent to which they deviate from international best practices and the best way forward to close the gaps that are identified. The reform procedures that result are expected to lead to both better service to the private sector and citizens, as well as enhanced revenue collection. The real property tax system has long been acknowledged to be antiquated and inadequate to its mandate and mission. The desirable reforms identified in recent years must be reassessed and, where appropriate, reinitiated and pursued with purpose and determination. We will do so as a matter of priority and ensure that the necessary resources are dedicated to this important challenge. Developing a modern and equitable system of property taxation will better serve our citizens and secure the revenues that are anticipated from that system. Previous estimates suggest that a properly functioning system could readily yield significant improvements in revenues. While the efforts to strengthen the Customs Department and the Real Property Tax Administration will take some time to come to fruition, we realize that given the state of the nation's finances, we cannot wait an indeterminate time to see results. Accordingly, this budget targets up to $80 million in increased customs, excise, and real property tax revenues in 2018-2019 over the anticipated run rate, so as to ensure that the revamped Revenue Collection Unit and the revenue agencies individually are mandated and inspired to improve their collection of the taxes that are on the books presently. Further, they will have to demonstrate, to my satisfaction and that of the Bahamian people, that their efforts are producing tangible benefits in bringing in uncollected and undercollected taxes. Mr. Speaker, it is undeniable that our current system of taxation must be reformed and modernized in order to ease the compliance burden on citizens and the private sector, as well as generate the revenues that are rightfully due to the government. As has been demonstrated with the introduction of value-added tax, it is possible to implement international best practices and modern processes and procedures based on state-of-the-art technologies such that tax administration is client-friendly, efficient, and effective. As I have said, we are striving to do just that for all of the major tax types. However, having said that, it is also evident that our very structure of taxation itself is antiquated and inadequate to the needs of modern governance in the 21st century. A tax system with traditionally heavy reliance on customs duties and more recently excise duties that apply solely to goods is clearly deficient in a world in which services have come to dominate goods in terms of relative economic importance. Indeed, it is estimated that services account for fully 78% of gross domestic product. This distortionary situation was rectified to some extent with the introduction of the broad-based value-added tax in 2015. But it is still the case that customs and excise duties account for upward of 30% of total recurrent revenue. With planned accession to the World Trade Organization, there will be a requirement to implement significant reductions in customs duties in this country in return for membership in a group that will secure access to foreign markets and the protections afforded by a structured rule-based system of trade, which is vitally important to a small trading nation such as ours. But outside of the WTO requirements, it is the view of the government that adjusting the relative burden of taxation from goods and toward a more equitable balance of goods and services is critical to reducing the distortions in our economy, which have disadvantaged those involved in the trade of goods, as well as our poorer citizens, who tend to spend a disproportionately higher share of their income on goods and services. The business license regime in our country, with a fee structure based on turnover, has long been cause for concern within the business community and with policymakers. Yes. The system is generally seen as inefficient, inequitable, and distortionary. Previous recommendations for a radical reform and even complete elimination of the fee structure as currently configured has inevitably floundered in the face of fiscal pressures to maintain revenue levels. In total, our tax system generates revenues that are projected to amount to some 16.1% of GDP in 2017 and 2018. That ratio stands in stark contrast to an average ratio in the mid-20s, or 20% range in the Caribbean region. As well, it has been estimated that our system as structured produces far less revenue than potentially could be raised given the economic structure of the country. In his latest Article 4 staff report, the IMF went so far as to suggest that with the recently revised national accounts, revealing an economy much larger than previously thought, there exists a significant scope to accelerate the pace of tax reform. In light of the evolving pressures outlined above, our government is of the view that it would be desirable and appropriate to look at a further restructuring of our system of taxation away from narrow-based and distortionary taxes. Accordingly, we have commissioned Deloitte, the accounting firm, to undertake a detailed assessment of the appropriateness of and options for alternative forms of business tax in the Bahamas, the revenue from which could, as an option, serve to replace the fees now collected in respect to business license. At this stage, this is simply exploratory work. At this stage, it's simply exploratory work, geared to obtain an empirically based assessment of tax options and to canvass the views of a full range of Bahamian stakeholders. This study is just underway, and I emphasize again that no policy commitment has been made to the introduction of any alternative form of tax at this juncture. They say I must repeat it. This study is just underway, and I emphasize that no policy commitment has been made to the introduction of any alternative form of tax at this juncture. As well, it needs to be borne in mind, at least for the purposes of prudent fiscal planning, that the introduction of such a new instrument would require an appropriate development and implementation period that would extend far beyond the time horizon of this budget. As well, Mr. Speaker, we are proceeding with the preparation of new debt management legislation that is also targeted for tabling in the period ahead. To that end, the Central Bank has approached the Commonwealth Secretariat to provide technical assistance for drafting appropriate legislation to modernize our public debt management infrastructure. Work to date suggests the establishment of a new framework consistent with international best practices that is designed to support a properly functioning debt management regime. That framework would include, for further consideration and possible implementation, the establishment of a public debt management unit responsible for debt management activities, the establishment of a public debt management advisory committee to guide the government's borrowing policies and debt management operations, the establishment of a public debt management strategy in line with the government's fiscal policy and budget framework, with which all borrowing and other debt management activities would need to comply. The establishment of mandatory requirements for reporting to Parliament by the Minister of Finance, including on the performance of debt management relative to the strategy, as well as on all guarantees issued by the government, and the provision of external audit requirements for all debt management activities. As an additional measure to manage debt more responsibly, the government has established a sinking fund to accommodate the repayment of the recent $750 million international bond issue, and will contribute some $39 million to that fund in the 2018-19 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, it virtually goes without saying that with the level of unemployment in this country and the annual rate of increase of our labor force, it is critically important that we succeed in boosting the rate of growth of our economy. We have been steadfast in our commitment to the goals, as it will bring significant benefits not only in terms of new and expanding job opportunities, but also in respect of contributing to our plan for fiscal consolidation. Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the matter of the ease of doing business in this country. All will know that we have not fared favorably in the annual country rankings of the ease of doing business developed by the World Bank. Indeed, in the latest 2018 rankings, which are based on data at the midpoint of 2017, we placed 119 out of 190 countries, with our worst showing in respect of registering property, where we actually placed 167th, followed by trading across borders with a 157th ranking.
Yeah.
Improving the ease of doing business in this country is therefore a core component of our strategy to bolster Bahamian entrepreneurship, investment, and economic growth. In our manifesto, we were explicit that we would progress public sector reform to create an efficient public service committed to improving the ease of doing business with the government. And shortly after coming to office, we followed through on that commitment with the establishment of a private sector-led committee to develop recommendations for improvements in the ease of doing business in this country. As a key element of that initiative, the Ministry of Finance formed a cross-agency committee to examine how to make the business license application process faster, easier, and more efficient. The committee consisted of representatives from finance and the major government agencies responsible for issuing approvals required to open a business. That is the Department of Physical Planning, the Ministry of Works, the Department of Environmental Health Services, and the Royal Bahamas Police Force. The ultimate goal of the committee was to streamline the entire business license process, to allow much faster approval times through greater use of digital platforms that will support integration of systems between agencies for complete online services. Our focus has been on making the system faster, easier, and better. To that end, we are making the business license system faster by shortening the time required to secure both new and renewed licenses. Easier, stress-free, and more citizen-centered by focusing greater interagency cooperation to facilitate the acquisition of licenses. And better through improved service delivery via a single point of contact. Upon completion in early 2019, the new system will also include the complete integration of systems between agencies and complete online services, including the submission of applications and the reservation of business names through the Office of the Registrar General. We are also reviewing the recommendations of the Ease of Doing Business Committee in respect of other areas of concern. In response, we are making administrative changes to procedures as well as introducing, as appropriate, proposed amendments to legislation to address those concerns. I will present highlights of the legislative amendments that are being proposed in response to the recommendations of the Ease of Doing Committee shortly. A full set of proposed legislative amendments is being tabled today. Mr. Speaker, we have also introduced the Commercial Enterprise Act to promote the establishment of new business undertakings or services with an investment of at least $250,000 in a number of specified areas of activity, including leading-edge sectors such as nanotechnology, bioinformatics, and analytics. The Act also provides for the prescription of any island or part thereof to be a specified commercial enterprise zone for the purpose of rationalizing infrastructural investments, efficient land use, or the encouragement of clusters of commercial development. Incentives may also be prescribed in respect of such specified commercial enterprise zones. In addition, the Act liberalizes the granting of work permits to any enterprise that seeks to establish itself in our country and requires permits for its management team and key personnel. The government is firmly dedicated to the growth and expansion of micro and small and medium-sized enterprises in the Bahamas. It is widely acknowledged that these enterprises comprise the so-called backbone of the private sector and are responsible for generating the bulk of new job opportunities. Central to our thrust in this area is a strategy to promote the development of MSMEs that is founded on 7 key policy pillars to guide specific policy prescriptions for these enterprises. These 7 key policy pillars are the following: improving the enabling environment for MSMEs by facilitating their interaction with public and regulatory entities, such as the ease of obtaining of licenses and certificates, as well as the use of digital platforms to fulfill tax and regulatory requirements. Increasing direct financing to MSMEs through the commitment of $25 million over 5 years for such measures as microloans, small business loans, grants, and guarantee facilities through the commercial banking sector. Enhancing MSME business development support through the establishment of the Small Business Development Center. Providing specific support for entrepreneurship and MSME development within marginalized groups, with specific funding and support set aside for youth and for poor or otherwise underserved communities. Fostering a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation with support for curricular-based programs such as Junior Achievement and for new financial literacy and entrepreneurial programs within the school system. Strengthening corporate governance and minimizing outside political interference within MSME enabling agencies, and promoting greater linkages between our MSME and other domestic and international sectors of our economy so that small businesses have more opportunities to sell their goods and services inside and out the country. On the matter of the new Small Business Development Center, I would add that this is an initiative spearheaded by the government, the University of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, and with support from the Organization of American States. The center will provide a resource for all Bahamians to receive advisory and technical support when seeking to open a business or expand their operations. The center will also steer entrepreneurs to available funding opportunities through government or private means and assist business owners in navigating through the regulatory and tax registration requirements for a new business. I am pleased to advise that the government and stakeholders of the Small Business Development Center have recently appointed the center's executive director. We expect the center will become operational shortly, and we shall have much more to say about that in the coming weeks. Beyond the streamlining of the business license process, we also announced a waiver of business license fees for small businesses with turnover under $100,000 that will take effect with the next filing period. Mr. Speaker, the government has a stated objective of pursuing the further diversification of our economy as a means of supporting more buoyant and resilient economic growth. To that end, we have secured a non-reimbursable grant from the Inter-American Development Bank in the amount of $500,000 to finance a 3-year technical cooperation project with a particular focus on the digital economy and the blue economy. With the objective of promoting Bahamian firms to incorporate digital technology into their business strategy and create new innovative technology-based business models, the government aims to develop a sector strategy that involves both public and private stakeholders. To that end, we contemplate the need to improve the existing ICT infrastructure and legal and institutional framework in order to promote investments in the digital sector, as well as to use digital solutions to improve productivity in all economic sectors. The blue economy concept was first used during the 2012 United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, and it is an evolving concept that recognizes the need to maximize the enormous economic potential presented by the ocean, while preserving it. In this regard, the blue economy can be broadly defined to include economic activity that directly or indirectly uses the sea as input. The concept of the blue economy includes the simultaneous promotion of economic growth, environmental sustainability, social inclusion, and strengthening of ocean ecosystems. For small island states such as the Bahamas, although traditional industries and sectors, fishing, maritime transport, and coastal tourism, represent a large portion of economic activity, articulating a strategy around our blue economy also enables identification and diversification into many other areas and emerging ocean-based activities and sectors, including marine aquaculture, seabed mining, maritime safety and surveillance, maritime biotechnology, maritime security offshore wind energy, ocean renewable energy, and deep sea oil and gas production. The project will proceed in 3 major phases. In the first phase, the project will undertake a diagnostic for each one of the industries with the objective of validating the initial activities that have been identified, prioritizing one or more actionable and discrete actions to support, with a focus on early implementation, the economic impact and possibility of scaling up. Expected results include a recommendation of the activities for each sector, with a detailed, time-bound action plan for each one of the activities discussed and agreed with relevant stakeholders. In phase 2, efforts will be dedicated to promote stakeholder ownership and commitment, to establish a structure for driving the implementation of the roadmap, and to initiate immediate actions utilizing available resources. In phase 3, activities will center on communications campaigns to promote the findings from the studies and awareness campaigns between the public and private stakeholders that will support the creation of networks and communities within the stakeholders. In addition, a monitoring and evaluation system with indicators regarding the sector's performance will be developed. Within the Bahamas' blue economy, there's been considerable public dialogue for years on the question of the extent to which the country is maximizing its potential financial and economic yields from its fisheries stock, its salt mines, and its deposits of aragonite. This diagnostic study will examine these and other blue economy opportunities empirically and dispassionately. The study and attended consultations with stakeholders and the general public will guide public policy so as to ensure that we as a country take full advantage of the promises of our blue economy in a way that is sustainable and maximizes the shared values of all Bahamian citizens. Mr. Speaker, As I have just explained, we began implementing our comprehensive and proactive economic action plan from the very first day that we took office last year. And we will proceed with its further implementation in the coming budget year. My colleague ministers will elaborate on their specific plans in their respective areas of responsibility during the upcoming budget debate. I will, however, stress yet again that our plans and actions will be guided by the overriding need for vigilant adherence to strict fiscal discipline. Whatever we do, and however we do it, will be faithful to the binding requirement that we meet the mandated fiscal balance objective in the new fiscal responsibility legislation. As such, requests for funding allocations for new initiatives have been scrutinized and prioritized meticulously. I will therefore now turn to a discussion of the current fiscal position as portrayed by the projected fiscal outturn for the 2017-18 fiscal year. I will then review the specific revenue measures that are being proposed in this budget to follow up on our government commitment to Bahamians, provide further tax relief to consumers and businesses, advance environmental and energy efficiency objectives, generate additional revenue for government, and enhance administration and compliance in respect to all major taxes. I will then present an assessment of fiscal prospects for the 2018-19 fiscal year and the next 2 fiscal years. This will bring me to a discussion of how those prospects square with the mandated objective for the fiscal balance that we must absolutely meet over the next 3 years. To set the context for that discussion, I will begin with a brief overview of the global economic environment and the state of and prospects for the Bahamian economy. Mr. Speaker, as compared to the global outlook that was presented in the budget communication last year, prospects for the world economy have now been revised upward appreciably, at least over the next 2 to 3 years. Beyond that, the impact of structural factors on the rate of potential growth is still expected to dominate the global economic landscape. Based on the latest World Economic Outlook published by the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, in April, the global economic outlook is the most buoyant that it has been since the start of the decade. This is spurred by expansionary fiscal policies in the United States, supportive world financial conditions, and an ongoing upswing in global investment and trade. The expansion of the world economy in 2017 at 3.8% was the strongest since 2011, and that pace is forecast to be maintained in both 2018 and 19 at 3.9% each year. However, the long-term outlook beginning in 2020 and beyond is projected to be somewhat more challenging for policymakers. At that point, the advanced economies are forecasted to return to potential growth rates that are significantly lower than those that prevailed before the onset of the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. Aging populations and meager productivity improvements are expected to be the main drivers of this slowdown. In the United States, growth over the medium term will be dampened below potential by the projected reversal of the expansionary impacts of the recent fiscal policy changes. In addition, the IMF is of the view that the balance of risk to the economic outlook tends to the downside over the medium term due to a number of significant concerns. These range from a potential sharp tightening of fiscal conditions as the advanced economies approach potential output levels to growing trade tensions and attendant threats of protectionist policies on the part of the major global trading countries. Prospects for the U.S. economy through 2019 have clearly been buoyed by the expansionary tax reform measures of December 2017. Particularly significant are the lower corporate income tax rates as well as the temporary allowance of full expensing of investments. Also important is the higher level of government spending flowing from the budget agreements of February 2018. The IMF estimates by 2020, the level of real GDP in that country will be some 1.2% higher than it otherwise would have been in the absence of announced tax policy changes. On an annual basis, U.S. growth is now projected at 2.9% this year and 2.7% in 2019. These rates reflect significant upward revision of 0.6% and 0.8% respectively from the forecast of last October. The sobering element of this new projection is that U.S. growth over the medium term is now expected to be weaker than previously forecast due to the increased fiscal deficits in the wake of current expansionary policies and the temporary nature of some of the recently announced tax policy changes. Both the euro area and Japan are forecast to expand at above-trend growth rates in the near term on the basis of accommodating policy stances, improved external demand conditions, and buoyant domestic demand. Growth projections for all major euro economies have been revised upward, with the aggregate outlook up 0.5 percentage point to a rate of 2.4% in 2018, followed by an upward revision of 0.3% to 2% in 2019. Economic prospects for both China and India remain largely unchanged, though still relatively buoyant, with growth rates exceeding 6.4% and 7.4% in 2018 and 19, respectively. In a nutshell, the relatively bullish outlook for the world economy, and especially our major trading partner, the United States, in the near term presents both opportunities and challenges for the Bahamas. While the global environment will clearly support the ongoing recovery and expansion of our economy, it will be incumbent on us to capitalize on these near-term developments and prospects to meaningfully address the fiscal problems that we confront. That will be critical to permit us to create the fiscal buffers and headroom that will be necessary when external conditions turn somewhat less favorable, as is projected by the IMF over the medium to long term. It will also be vitally important that we proactively implement our transformative plan to remove the structural impediments to more buoyant growth, strengthen the productivity, competitiveness, and resilience of our domestic economy, and position it to better adapt to the evolving international environment, including pending accession to the World Trade Organization. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to recent domestic economic developments and the prospects for the future. The Department of Statistics recently released its estimates of gross domestic product for 2017, as well as revisions for the previous 4 years. The rate of real economic growth last year is estimated to have been 1.4%, as had been projected at the time of the last budget. In addition, the historical revisions suggest that the size of our economy is in current dollar terms was some $577 million larger in 2016 than had been estimated last year, a development that is reflected in GDP estimates for 2017 at just over $12 billion. These revisions, of course, affect the fiscal ratios for the weight of both the deficit and debt relative to GDP that are presented in this communication and in the supporting documentation. As such, they are especially relevant in the context of the government's fiscal policy planning in relation to the achievement of the fiscal targets set out in the eminent Fiscal Responsibility Bill. I'm tempted. but I just want the member for Eglinton to know, the last 5 years showed real recession, real economic loss, Mr. Speaker.
And those figures were right.
And those figures were right. The relatively modest rebound in real economic growth in 2017 was driven primarily by buoyant activity in the construction sector as a result of completion work on the Bahama Resort and other foreign investment projects, as well as hurricane-related reconstruction activity. However, other private sector construction work remained relatively subdued as the commercial banks maintained prudent lending policies. Reflecting this, total mortgage disbursements for new construction and repairs shrank by 3.4% in 2017 on the heels of a 6.7% contraction in 2016. The performance of the tourism sector was muted in 2017, reflecting severe weather-related travel disruptions, the hurricane-related reduction in hotel capacity in Grand Bahama, and enhanced competition from competitor destinations. Following growth of 2.5% in 2016, total visitor arrivals contracted by 2.1% last year on the basis of reductions in both air and sea arrivals by 4% and 1.5% respectively. The persistent and long-standing relatively flat performance of the air and stayover segments of the tourism market is particularly troubling, as that is the portion that makes the most significant contribution to the growth of value added in the tourism industry. And that's changing. Getting better. The lackluster performance of this market last year was reflected, for instance, in the performance of the large hotel properties in New Providence and Paradise Island, where the average occupancy rate declined by 10% to 60.7%. However, despite this development, total room revenue was largely unchanged on the basis of increased room inventory. In contrast, there are now indications that the performance of the tourism sector rebounded somewhat more buoyantly in the first quarter of 2018, and that this improvement will be sustained. I understand Baintown is integral to that. The labor market posted improved performance in 2017 in line with emerging... The labor market posted improved performance in 2017 in line with the emerging rebound in economic growth. The key driving factors in this improvement were the phased opening of Bahama Resort, hurricane-related construction activity, and a number of international cultural events. The Department of Statistics reports that between November 2016 and November 2017, total employment increased by 11,345 to a total of 203,730. This growth in employment surpasses the 4.1% expansion in the labor force during this period, the latter reflecting both the entry of new graduates into the labor market and a 2,000 decrease in the number of discouraged workers. As a result, the national rate of unemployment in November last year stood at 10.1%, fully 1.5 percentage points lower than the rate a year earlier. Improvements in the labor market were also broad-based across the country. The unemployment rate in New Providence fell by 2.3 percentage points to 10.6%. It declined by 1.3% to 12.1% in Grand Bahama, and by 0.5% to 8.6% in Abaco over the 12-month period. The rate of retail price inflation rose to 1.5% in 2017, after having declined by 0.4% the year before, largely reflecting the impact of increased international oil prices. The dominant component of the price index, comprising housing, water, gas, electricity, and other fuels, posted a cost increase of 3.7% during the year as compared to a 1.1% decline in 2016. In contrast, the average cost of food and non-alcoholic beverages continued to decline in 2017, though by a more modest 0.1% on the heels of a 0.9% contraction the prior year. With higher world oil prices, the average price of gasoline and diesel rose by 8.9% and 10.6% respectively, following declines in the area of 10% in 2016. Developments on the monetary and credit front remained positive in the last year, with the banking sector's credit quality indicators improving significantly and the domestic banks maintaining strong capital levels. Private sector loan arrears fell by over 12% in 2017 and by a further 2.5% in the first quarter of this year. Arrears in the non-performing segment declined by over 22% last year and by an overall 1.1% in the first quarter of this year, 0.1% in the first quarter of this year. Interest rates were generally lower in 2017, led by commercial mortgages with a reduction of over 1 full percentage point to an average of 6.83%. Residential and consumer rates both posted declines of almost 0.5% to 5.76% and 13.61% respectively. With the government's foreign borrowing activities, both bank liquidity and external reserves expanded during the year. The latter increased by a notable $513 million to $1.4 billion at the end of 2017. That amounted to some 23 weeks of total merchandise imports, which is almost double the international benchmark. Reserves rose by a further $189 million in the first quarter of this year to a level of just under $1.6 billion, largely reflecting improvements in the performance of the tourism sector. As for the balance of payments, the country account deficit grew by $750 million in 2017 to a level of $1.9 billion. This reflected a deterioration in the merchandise trade deficit of roughly $250 million to $2.4 billion, with non-oil imports expanding by $160 million, largely in respect of capital equipment for foreign investment projects and for hurricane-related construction work. The surplus on the services account fell by $120 million to a level of just under $1 billion. The external borrowing activities of the government impacted the capital and financial accounts of the balance of payments last year, with the surplus rising to over $1 billion to just over $1.6 billion. Net private loan inflows also grew by $211 million to $722 million. Net direct investment inflows totaled $74 million. As for economic growth prospects, expectations are for continued strengthening of the momentum underway, with further gains by the tourism sector on the basis of sustained expansion in the United States and other key source markets. Various foreign investment projects are expected to continue to buoy the domestic construction sector. As well, the full opening of Baha Mar should add to the more buoyant growth impetus. We can thus anticipate yet further improvements in labor market conditions in the period ahead. On the basis of these evolving trends, we expect the rate of economic growth in real terms to increase from the 1.4% of 2017 to some 2.5% this year and 2.2% in 2019. We're growing. and that ain't fake news. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to fiscal performance in the 2017-18 fiscal year. At the time of the last budget communication, a GFS deficit of $323 million was projected for the 2017-18 fiscal year. As I had mentioned at the time, since the budget had been presented a mere 3 weeks after the elections, the fiscal projections in the budget largely reflected preparatory work that had gone on prior to our coming to office. In light of that fact, I explicitly stated that since our government was firmly committed to the achievement of our deficit and debt reduction objectives, we would implement in-year fiscal adjustments as needed to secure a lower deficit in 2018-19 than was being projected in that communication. And indeed, the government did announce in July an across-the-board 10% reduction in primary or discretionary recurrent expenditure relative to the sums that had been budgeted. Interest payments, debt redemptions, of course, reflects fixed commitments of the government. On the basis of this in-year expenditure restraint measure and our ongoing fiscal vigilance, we have succeeded, based on the projected fiscal results for the 2017-18 fiscal year, in reducing expenditure on the wage bill and purchase of goods and services by some $120 million. Reflecting 10.3% from the amounts budgeted for these items. All subventions to the state-owned enterprises represent an important portion of primary recurrent expenditure, at roughly 1/3 of the total. It is clear that reductions in this area are also warranted and necessary to the achievement of our fiscal goals. However, as I outlined earlier, any such reductions are dependent on those enterprises implementing much-needed transformations and modernization exercises that realistically can only be achieved over time. The senior management team of these entities have been directed to do so. Capital expenditure during the 2017-18 fiscal year was also subject to restraint and is expected to come in at $153 million, down from the budgeted $230 million. However, during the year, a detailed review by the Ministry of Finance, the central bank, and advisors determined that a modification of accounting treatment of payments to Resolve Bahamas was necessary. These payments relate to the payout on the initial $100 million in promissory notes issued by the previous government to the Bank of the Bahamas to transfer non-performing loans. By treating the toxic loans as receivables, they were considered investment assets, and as such, the payments were not considered as expenditure items. Based on Resolve's own conservative estimates for recoverability, it now would be more appropriate to treat only 20% of these loans as assets. 100 million transferred to Resolve, value of only 20%. As such, 80 million of the full payment of 100 million has been reclassified as capital expenditure. Consequently, the outturn for capital expenditure in 2017-18 at $233 million is largely in line with the budgeted projections. For its part, recurrent revenue in the current fiscal year continues to perform less buoyantly than had been projected at the time of the budget communication. And this despite the economy posting a real rate of growth of 1.4% in 2017, exactly as had been projected last May. At a projected $2 billion and $20 million, recurrent revenue is expected to be some $130 million below forecast. Given the rebound in real growth Such a lackluster performance of revenue is definitely a matter of pressing concern and speaks to the mandate given to the Ministry of Finance and its Revenue Enhancement Unit to address the areas of revenue underperforming so as to exceed the status quo run rate in the upcoming fiscal year. The bottom line is that the yield on our revenue system at 16.1% of GDP in 2017-18 is well below the revenue yields found elsewhere in the region, where yields average in the area of 25% of GDP, and certainly is inadequate to the needs of a modern government. In reviewing the fiscal outturn for 2017-18, it is also incumbent on me to clarify the figures for debt redemption. This clarification is necessary due to the persistent campaign of misinformation perpetrated in part by some in this House who certainly know better but refuse to do better. They and other pundits, finding no real fault in this government's progress in addressing the fiscal maladies in place, have sought willfully to misrepresent the government's fiscal activities and financial position for self-serving political gain. One will note a large increase in debt redemption this fiscal year to a level of over $1 billion as compared to the budget estimate of $433 million. The level of redemption reflects the government's decision to effect a sizable rollover of bridging facilities into longer-term debt through the proceeds of $750 million international bond issue in late 2017. Such repayment of debt appears as part of the recurrent expenditure, which explains the large increase in the components of the fiscal accounts. Given that debt repayment is, however, deducted in the calculation of the GFS deficit, we have appropriately modified our presentation of recurrent expenditure to exclude debt repayment. And Mr. Speaker, just so the public would know, the refinancing that was done was to convert short-term, higher interest-bearing instruments to longer-term, lower interest-bearing debt instruments, reducing our interest expense. It is important to point out, Mr. Speaker, that this administration, in terms of its application of GFS deficit recording and reporting at the summary level, is applying the very same internationally accepted methodology and protocols as the former administration. I say no more about that at this juncture. On the basis of these fiscal developments, the GFS deficit outturn in 2017 is projected at $310 million, a net improvement of $13 million over the budget forecast of $323 million.
Despite Bank of the Bahamas.
Despite Bank of the Bahamas and some other things. Did you forget we had a hurricane? I forget it? You forgot about Ragged Island too? Oh, okay, just one of you forgot about it. You said, oh, hurricane. Relative to the size of the economy,
Only hurricane you have is a Perry lost to sea.
the fiscal outturn in 2017-18 represents a significant improvement relative to the fiscal performance in 2016-17, the last year of the previous administration's term in office. The GFS deficit in 2017-18 is projected at 2.5% of GDP, down by over one-half from the 5.5% of GDP in 2016-17. In dollar terms, this means that the efforts of the current government reduced the deficit by some $351 million year on year.
What's the GFS deficit in 2017 in dollars?
500 something odd.
They have trouble accepting that.
Yeah. The GFS deficit in 2017-18 is projected at 2.5% of GDP, down by over one-half from the 5.5% of GDP in 2016-2017. In dollar terms, this means that the efforts of the current government reduced the deficit by some $351 million year on year.
You want to hear it again? You want to hear it again for the third time?
To help,
You want to hear it for the third time?
just to help Ragged Island, because I see you shaking his head. The deficit last year was $650 million, if the number, it's about $650 million. This year, the deficit is going to be $310 million.
And the difference is 300.
50%.
This agitation
You understand? You understand? There's no accrual accounting. Mr. Speaker, again. You know, Mr. Speaker, they're trying to distract me from my presentation. But once again, I hear Cat Island, who seems to really have a difficulty with this, that there is no accrual accounting. This is all apples and apples. There's no oranges in this. This is apples and apples.
They just don't like good news.
That's all. I don't know why. I mean, to use their mantra, I don't know why they're unhappy. You know, the Bahamian people are doing well, and they're unhappy. I don't understand it.
Because it ain't them.
That sounds familiar?
It ain't them. It ain't them.
On the basis of this fiscal improvement and the growth in the size of the economy, the ratio of debt to GDP is projected at 57.2% at the end of 2017-18 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, for the fiscal year 2018-19, the government faced with stark and urgent fiscal realities that will require substantial enhanced revenues and the accompanying upward adjustment in certain taxes and fees. I will advance the substantial elements of these increases in details later in this presentation.
Hold on.
Given this need to enhance revenue, it is even more incumbent upon the government to do what it can to protect the vulnerable, as well as to implement key policy priorities and reshape the economy for sustained success. The government is undertaking a number of very targeted tax measures to provide tangible benefits to key segments of Bahamian society and economy. I shall turn my attention to this presently. The details of these various measures are set out in an annex to the budget document. As for measures that we are implementing to meet our commitment to Bahamians and provide tax relief to individuals and businesses, effective August 1, we are eliminating VAT on all bread basket items. And yes, Mr. Minister, with the exception of sugar. As sugar, for health reasons, is planned to be removed from the list of bread basket items. This would mean the elimination of VAT on the following items: butter, cooking oil, mayonnaise, grits, cheese, corned beef, there will be no attacking the corned beef. No attacks on corned beef. Evaporated milk, margarine, rice, flour, bread, tomato paste, baby cereal, baby formula, soups, broths, baby food, power detergents, condensed milk, soaps, fresh milk, and mustard. Mustard too? Mustard too. We are eliminating VAT on medicines.
Yes. He's smiling.
We are eliminating VAT on medicines.
Oh, yeah.
We are eliminating VAT on residential property insurance. And I want to read that one again.
Yes.
We are eliminating VAT on residential property insurance. We are waiving VAT on residential electricity bills at or under $100 and water bills at or under $50. As I indicated, this will help the most vulnerable in our communities. They want me to read it again. We are waiving VAT on residential electricity bills at or under $100 and water bills at or under $50. For clarity, this is not for the first $100 or $50 in a person's bill, but it is targeted those bills which come in at or under the stated amounts. For electricity customers, this will impact over 30,000 BPL households alone.
How many?
30,000 households will be assisted, aided by this exemption. Water customers. For water customers, this will impact over 43,000 Water and Sewage Corporation customers. 43,000 average and below average income homes will be assisted with this necessary utility. This waiver will be applicable to all licensed utilities in the country. So that includes Grand Bahama Power and Grand Bahama Water Utility Company.
Yes.
So Grand Bahama, we haven't forgot about you. Spanish Wells too. We are increasing the customs personal travel exemption from $300 to $500 per person. We are increasing the customs personal travel exemption from $300 to $500 per person. Twice a year. Twice a year. We are providing for the value-added tax zero rating of fundraising activities held by charitable organizations. We are implementing various concessions in respect of real property tax, customs duties, excise duties, business license fees, and stamp tax in favor of designated economic empowerment zones, beginning with the over-the-hill communities. What do you say, Baintown? Eggleston, your time coming. The Fox still coming too. It's the people's time. We are providing for the waiver of duty on clothing and shoe imports upon application by importers and retailers of the same. This will be extended to any merchant, large or small, who has a business license for the sale of clothes and shoes. So if you have a business, retail business, selling clothing or shoes, you can apply to the government to bring in your supplies duty-free. Nice. But it is expected that you will pass it on. You're getting a little ahead of me. We are at the same time, Mr. Speaker, putting in place procedures to ensure that these savings are passed on to the customers. I think that is worth saying again. We are at the same time, in giving these concessions, putting in place procedures to ensure that the savings are passed on to the consumers. This will be a benefit to all Bahamians, but particularly to those who do not have the means to travel abroad to shop for their clothes like others are sometimes able to do. We help in our own. People stuff. We are providing duty-free, that's a good point. You can't shop online and get the exemption. You only get the exemption if you have a business license from the government of the Bahamas. And so you will not be able to benefit from duty exemption from the Amazons and all the rest of them of the world.
We're attacking Amazon.
All right? And again, we are taking that stance to protect the Bahamian retailer. We are providing duty-free entry for goods for use in the commercial printing industry, as well as for processing and garment manufacturing equipment without the need to apply for specific concessions as before. We are extending for 1 year both the City of Nassau Revitalization Act and the Family Island Development Encouragement Act. We are extending for 5 years the first-time homeowners stamp exemption. 5 years. We are extending for 2 years the duty exemption on materials used for the renovation, repair, and upgrade of dilapidated buildings. We are eliminating duties on a number of food products, including whole salmon. How do y'all like that word? Whole salmon. Frozen fish fillets. Bread spreads.
They're not my.
Potato products, snappers included.
I just use fresh fish.
Tofu, and prepared and preserved tomatoes. We are eliminating duties on solar kits upon application to the Ministry of Finance. Presently, solar panels are duty-free. And this new allowance will mean the vendors or individuals who are bringing in full solar kits can have all related elements bought in duty-free. And of course, you know that is a matter that is near and dear to the heart of the Prime Minister when he speaks about solarization. And so we're going to facilitate your vision, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. You're a good man.
Say that again.
That needs repeating. Say it one more time,
Has made you a day.
We are reducing duties on floor tiles and fabric softeners. We are extending the 0.75% business license fee rate, currently applicable to hotels with turnovers over $400 million, to all hotels with 10 rooms or more, so that smaller Bahamian-owned hotels can take advantage of the concessions that were offered to larger foreign-owned properties. We're looking out for Bahamians. We are extending the duty exemption to church buses 8 years old or less from the current limitation that limit the concession to buses that are 3 years old or less. You can go there in a modern bus. We are providing an exemption from business license fees for all schools that are registered with the Ministry of Education. And we are eliminating the duty on airplanes and helicopters in an effort to build an airplane registry industry within the country. And I know my friend will have something to say about that. For both me and you, Caroline. Both me and you. Both me and you. So make sure when she attacks me, she attacks you too. But Mr. Speaker, this is in furtherance of our determination to build an airplane registry industry within the country which we believe can provide substantial new revenue and business. Mr. Speaker, the government maintains as a policy priority the need to embrace technologies that reduce the national need for the import and use of fossil fuels, and those which maximize renewable energies. In addition to the reduction in duties related to import of solar energy components, this government is undertaking the following. We are reducing the excise duty on electric and hybrid vehicles valued at $50,000 and under to 10%. And that's down from 65% if I'm not mistaken. We are reducing the excise duty on electric motorcycles down to 10%. We are reducing the excise duty on new, smaller vehicles up to 1,500 cc in engine size down to 25%. And for clarity, this applies to new vehicles only. We are reducing the excise duty on rechargeable batteries, other than conventional car batteries, down to 10%. And we're increasing the environmental levy on all vehicles from $200 to $250. In respect to vehicles, the express policy intent is to expand and enhance the noteworthy policy objective of the former administration to encourage the import and sale of more fuel-efficient cars and trucks. Through this policy that we are today expanding, the country has seen a rise in the import and use of electric and hybrid vehicles and a buildup of the support systems for the same. This administration wishes to continue to encourage a transition to these more efficient vehicles. I wish to point out that we are restricting the landed price ceiling to $50,000 for hybrid and electric vehicles to avoid persons bringing in luxury hybrid vehicles at the reduced duty levels. In other words, we don't want the more wealthy among us to go out and buy, like Cat Island, yeah, like Cat Island, and Exuma, don't forget about Exuma. To go out and buy
I drive a Mini Coupe
2018 Porsches hybrid and get a duty rate at 10%. That is not the idea. The idea is to give the average family an opportunity to own a new vehicle at a reduced import cost. So again, those vehicles that are valued over $50,000 will not qualify for this particular reduction in duty rate. Our policy rationale is that if you can afford a luxury vehicle, you can pay the standard vehicle excise duty rate. We're also making brand new small vehicles much more affordable, with the duty rate on those vehicles being set at 25%. In addition to the fuel efficiency of smaller vehicles generally speaking, which can reach efficiency levels of some hybrids, these vehicles are much better suited to small islands or congested cities like we have here, particularly in New Providence. Further, the lower duties on these small cars, as well as on electric vehicles and hybrids, will allow many ordinary Bahamians, once again, to be able to afford a brand new car. Mr. Speaker, in respect to protecting Bahamians from vulnerabilities, perhaps nothing can be so potentially devastating, personally, emotionally, and financially, than having to face the prospects of a major injury or illness to yourself or anyone you care about. Thus, I am also pleased to announce that the government will, in this upcoming fiscal year, Also introduce the first phase of the catastrophic care insurance plan on the NHI during the coming fiscal year, extending real and tangible critical health care coverage to Bahamians throughout the country.
Doctor delivers us again.
That's the Minister of Health. He delivers. And Kalani delivers too. For the business community, our legislative reforms are intended to make it easier for them to do business in the Bahamas and to clarify certain key elements within our tax laws that have been the subject of contention between businesses and the tax agencies. Selected examples include the following. Various provisions of the Value-Added Tax Act are being amended and or supplemented to, for instance, streamline the advanced ruling process and simplify the auditing process, clarify the application of zero rating for international transport and auxiliary services, define the process of transshipment, define ancillary educational fees. The business license regulations are being amended to ease the filing requirements of small and medium-sized enterprises with turnover under $10 million by giving them the option of submitting either certified or audited financial statements or certified bank statements. Businesses with turnover in excess of $10 million will require fully audited financial statements. The Real Property Tax Act is being amended to clarify the definition of owner-occupied property. A wholesale change in the tax policy for real estate a wholesale change in the taxation policy for real estate that exempts real estate from value-added tax, replacing that tax on the same with a simpler stamp tax formula. A rate of 2.5% stamp tax on transactions valued up to $100,000 and a rate of 10% above $100,000. So value-added tax will no longer apply to real estate transactions. Instead, we will revert to the stamp tax regime that we had prior to the implementation of that at 2.5% flat rate up to $100,000 and 10% on transactions over $100,000. So, the implementation within the upcoming fiscal year of a bonded, I want the car dealers to listen to this. The implementation within the upcoming fiscal year of a bonded facility arrangement for car dealers, whether big or small, to make it easier for all auto retailers to conduct business. That means that they can bring in their vehicles, put them in a bonded area, quarantined, and pay the duty as they sell the cars. That will have tremendous cash flow advantages for those car dealers. And the Business License Act is being amended to require persons importing more than 2 cars. This is also important. The Business License Act is being amended to require persons importing more than 2 cars per 12-month period to have a valid business license, as well as to control the unauthorized roadside vending of vehicles.
Yes.
To be absolutely clear, the government wants to continue to encourage all current and future Bahamian entrepreneurs to bring in and sell vehicles if they so wish. However, we are asking and expecting that if you are in the car import and sales business, that you get a business license and join the sector formally. This protects your prospective customers and permits the government to have a full accounting of the sector. So we don't want any more of these roadside car lots. In developing an assessment of fiscal prospects for the 2018-19 fiscal year and beyond, a number of critical factors must be taken into account. First, the urgent need to pay off the more than $360 million in arrears to which I referred earlier and which we plan to clear as follows. $172 million in 2018-19, $106 million in 2019-20, and $75 million in 2020-21, and a smaller balance thereafter. A summary of these arrears and obligations, again, is in the annex to the budget. Secondly, the adoption of proper and factual budgeting for all known commitments across the breadth and scope of government expenditures, thus ending the practice of under-budgeting for the sake of displaying unrealistically favorable fiscal outcomes during the budget exercise, but leaving large unpaid arrears to be paid later. This is where your VAT money going. This government will not continue the sham of purposely under-budgeting known commitments, which only leads to another buildup of arrears left for others to clean up. As a result, the right budgeting approach has led to an increase in allocations of some $76 million in 2018-19. Examples of some of these more significant adjustments, including having to increase provisions to meet core IT service contract obligations, pensions for public officers, and even the school lunch program, all of which were seemingly under-budgeted, knowing full well that the allocations would be insufficient. And I want to apologize to those lunch vendors in particular.
Haven't been paid in months.
Who continue to struggle as we try to find the money to pay them.
Haven't been paid.
Under-budgeted. We think we're being smart, but we are penalizing hard-working Bahamians.
Yes.
Third, some $48 million in financing for the selected new initiatives in respect of both recurrent and capital expenditure that the government is implementing in the next fiscal year to advance its socioeconomic policy agenda, such as $13.5 million for the digital government initiatives in the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Education, $6 million for the construction of a new school in New Providence.
Yes. You can do that?
We can build that. Oh yeah, the minister's on that. $5 million for small and medium-sized business support. $5 million for the Over the Hill initiative. Baintown, you got to take me to lunch. $5 million for LED street lighting.
Yes.
$5 million for a solar demonstration project on one of the family islands. Zoma boy, you should clap for that. Ragged Island clap, I'm sure. $4 million for the recruitment of new college graduates.
Yes.
$2.6 million for BTVI scholarships.
Yes.
And as I always say to my colleagues and to others, technical training is important to me.
Critical my language.
And the fact that the government has agreed to provide free education at BTVI for all those who are willing and want to enter a trade and learn a skill, I think is an incredibly empowering initiative. And again, thank you. $1 million for the the Prime Minister's cultural grant. And the Junkanoo boys should clap for that. And $1 million for the Freedom of Information support. And the Organization for Responsible Government should clap for that. Fourth, in light of the fact that the government wage bill has grown by $226 million, or 40% between 2011 and 12 and 2018 and 19, in an economy that has posted little, if any, real growth, the necessity of exercising restraint in respect to the overall wage bill and headcount, and also the need to focus on enhanced professional skills as the existing professional staff retires.
How much is the increase by?
It's increased by $226 million
During
from
what time?
2012 to 2000. That's that. Fifth, the establishment of funding of the sinking fund, to which I referred to earlier.
Sir.
Sixth, the vital need to establish a disaster relief fund over the medium-term horizon to absorb the fiscal consequences of natural disasters. Seventh, the critically important need to boost capital expenditure on critical public infrastructure to some $300 million in order to enhance prospects for more buoyant growth of the economy. Eighth, the impact of the various revenue measures in this budget. Ninth, the pending requirements to implement important reductions in customs duties, which are critical to the eventual elimination of the distortions in our economy and necessary for the accession to the WTO, which is targeted for December 2019. 10th, the need to engage the unions and key stakeholders in a discussion of the issues of pension reform, given its potential future impact, fiscal impact. One estimate suggesting that accrued government pension liabilities could exceed $3.5 billion in the next dozen years. We have to face the reality. 11th, the mandated requirement to meet deficit objectives of 1.8% of GDP in 2018-19, 1% in 2019-20, and 0.5% in 2021. With all of these fiscal pressures at play, it is estimated that we would face a significant fiscal gap in the 2018, 2019, and beyond that would need to be eliminated if we are to fully meet the mandated deficit targets. In assessing options to secure the attainment of the deficit targets, the choices available to us are limited. In developing the budget framework, we have also approved new funding allocations in respect of recurrent and capital expenditure that are of the highest priority to the government's policy agenda. Indeed, it will be noted that close to one-half of the budget heads have been allocated either virtually the same or even smaller amounts for 2018-19 than they were allocated in 2017-18. I want to say that again. For close to one-half of the budget heads in this year's budget, the current or the upcoming fiscal year's budget is either equal to or less than the previous allocations. Taking this serious. Similarly, the tax reductions that we are announcing are selective and in line with our social and policy commitment to the Bahamian people. The various increases in fees, service charges, and taxes that are being implemented have been selected to advance environmental and energy efficiency objectives and/or judiciously enhance revenues. Yes, there is a cost. The bottom line is that we must pay off the massive backlog of arrears, judiciously finance our policy agenda, meet our deficit targets, and set the stage for the pending reductions in customs duties.
Come alive now.
That is a more daunting fiscal policy challenge, indeed, that requires decisive and difficult policy actions. To address the challenges, we are proposing a 3-year fiscal strategy that will allow us to both deal with the assorted fiscal pressures that we face in 2018-19 and beyond, and meet the deficit targets each year. As a core component of that strategy, as mentioned earlier, is a number of enhanced revenue measures in the form of an increase in taxes and fees, and enhanced revenue collection efforts, targeting critically needed new revenues. The incremental revenue gains will permit execution of the government's 3-year fiscal plan as follows. In year 1, we will pay off $170 million in old bills and finally budget properly for current known commitments.
Yes.
I know you don't want to hear that. I know you don't hear that, but that's the fact. In year 2, we will pay over $100 million in additional arrears and begin to implement reductions in customs and excise duties to rebalance the tax burden between the provision of goods and services and reduce the attendant distortionary impacts. And in year 3, we will substantially complete the payment of arrears and make further significant reductions in customs and excise duties. To facilitate this, we are proposing a number of measures that are designed to generate additional revenue to the government. Specifically, we are increasing the taxation of gaming house activities through the introduction of a sliding scale of rates applied to taxable revenue, namely up to $20 million, a rate of 20%. Between $20 million and $40 million, a rate of 25%. Between $40 million and $60 million, a rate of 30%. Between $60 million and $80 million, a rate of 35%. Between $80 million and $100 million, a rate of 40%. And over $100 million, a rate of 50%. Also, the taxation of gaming patrons through a 5% stamp tax to be levied on both deposits made by patrons at the gaming houses and any non-online games or digital sales. An increase in various immigration fees. Introduction of new port fees. The real property tax on foreign-owned vacant land is increasing from 2% of value up from 1.5%. Licensing fees on large commercial vehicles increased by $50 from Class B for Class B and Class C vehicles. And increases to police records fees, fingerprinting fees for casinos, and labor certificate fees. Most substantially, Mr. Speaker, the government, this is the line you wanted to hear. Most substantially, Mr. Speaker, the government is proposing an increase in the rate of value-added tax from the current 7.5% to 12%, effective July 1. Mr. Speaker, our government fully appreciates the sacrifice, the substantial increase in the VAT rate and other taxes.
Be quiet!
Our government fully appreciates the sacrifice, the substantial increases in the VAT rate and other taxes will represent to our citizens. But as I have repeatedly said on record, this government was elected to do what is right for the welfare of the country and not to do what is politically expedient or politically popular. Facing the situation that we have, we could do as governments have done before and simply present a misleading budget with under-budgeted allocations and hidden obligations. We could have kicked the can down the road and borrowed some more, delaying the inevitable day of reckoning. By playing this game, we'd have only made a bad situation worse. The country's bond rating is in junk status. Y'all should listen. Y'all really should listen.
Well, they don't want no one there.
The country's bond rating is at junk status.
You're going to get the headline.
The reason for that is because others before us failed to act promptly and judiciously.
Yes.
But worse than the junk status, the penalty for inaction is a continued quickening crawl towards a fiscal point of no return.
No return.
And as we have seen, when countries hit crisis mode, the path to correction is extraordinarily hard and painful, and more particularly, out of our control. You see, Mr. Speaker, now I'll wait for my debate on that. In the budget, we could have pretended that this time we would collect all the uncollected and uncollected taxes in a few weeks and months. But we recognize that while we must improve our tax yield on existing taxes immediately, which is why we are institutionalizing the Revenue Enhancement Unit, we understand that to realistically improve our capacity to collect on all taxes is a multi-year project given the institutional weaknesses that prevail today. We will improve in this area. We must improve in this area. And we will report on our progress regarding the same.
Yep.
That notwithstanding the firm determination of this government is to fix what we must fix, the situation, and do so beginning today. No more kicking the can down the road for someone else to clean up. We are making the tough choices, understanding the redress of our fiscal situation does require real sacrifice on behalf of our citizens. We understand the redress of our fiscal situation requires real sacrifice on the part of our citizens. However, by doing so, the country will reverse its spiraling debt situation and set itself up for success in the medium and long term. To ignore the dire fiscal situation before us would be to delay the inevitable adjustment. The longer we would have delayed, the worse the correction that would be required. Mr. Speaker, the interest on these loans year after year is becoming unbearable, and it will soon collapse on the system. In other words, if we do not get our debt under control, the amount of interest on that debt will make the government's ability to provide the services to its citizens unavailable, impossible. Already, our interest is $311 million that we're paying on interest, on debt. $311 million.
Every year.
And growing.
Every year.
We have to address the situation. We do not have to look far to see the consequences of governments and countries that waited too long. Those jurisdictions that were forced into painful structural adjustments in order to get the foreign currency necessary to enable them to import the basics and keep their countries afloat. This government will not wait until it's too late, until we are placed into the hands of agencies like the International Monetary Fund. Instead, we are acting now, and we are acting responsibly. We make the commitment as well that as the hundreds of millions of old arrears and obligations are finally paid off over the next 3 years, the government will then give back to consumers in the form of customs duties and excise reductions on the order of $100 million to benefit of Bahamians throughout the country. So we have to increase fees and taxes now, but at the end of our consolidation period, we will pay back through concessions on imports
Transparency.
at least the minimum of $100 million to the benefit of the Bahamian people.
Yes.
That's what happens. That's the ability that you have once you get your fiscal house in order. And all of us manage a house. And we know that if we have debt, mortgage, it means that we cannot do some of the other things that we would like to do to empower ourselves. With the implementation of this 3-year fiscal strategy, the mandated deficit targets will be fully met in 2018-19 and the 2 following years. The end result will be a balanced budget after 3 years with some 100 million in duty. The end result will be a balanced budget after 3 years with over $100 million in duties and excise tax reductions, bringing down the cost of imported goods.
Yes.
As for the fiscal projections for 2018-19, recurrent expenditure will amount to $2,589 million, an increase of $346 million from the budgeted amount in 2017-18. This increase includes the $172 million in arrears that will be paid in the coming year. The $76 million increase as a result of the adoption of full and proper budgeting for known commitments across the breadth and scope of government expenditure. Some $19 million for the new recurrent expenditure policy initiatives that I previously discussed, and $89 million for additional interest payments. Y'all hear what I said?
Break it down.
Let me take, because this is where your VAT money going, and this is important. This is important, Mr. Speaker. This is where the VAT money is going.
Break it down.
Well, maybe they stop listening so you can carry the message, because you should be listening.
Fiscal responsibility. Fiscal responsibility.
As for the projections for 2018-19, recurrent expenditure will amount to $2,589 million, an increase of $346 million from the budgeted amount in 2017-18. This increase includes the $117 million in arrears that will be paid in the coming year. That means bills that have been amassing and not being paid for years. It includes some of the legal judgments against the government that have not been paid for years. National insurance that has not been paid in years. PEC bills who have not been paid in years. Water and sewage and all the rest, Mr. Speaker. The $76 million increase as a result of the adoption of full... Yeah, parliamentarians got to pay their water bill. The $76 million increase as a result of the adoption of full and proper budgeting for known commitments across the breadth and scope of government expenditures. In other words, the lunch vendors can get paid on time. The contractors can get paid on time because we would have provided for those expenditures, and not like others who make commitments with no idea how they're going to pay for it. Some $19 million for new recurrent expenditure policy initiatives that I previously discussed. That's the Over the Hill initiative and the small business development and all the rest of $19 million. 19. And $89 million for additional interest payments. And that is important. $89 million for additional interest payments that does not inure to the immediate benefit of Bahamians. That's just to pay interest on loans and debt that has been amassed for years by the Bahamian people, by their government, on the backs of the Bahamian people, because they did not want to face realities and live within their means or do what is necessary to correct the picture. The level of capital expenditure in 2018-19 is set at $299 million, up $69 million from $230 million in 2017-18. Demands for new investments in public infrastructure clearly exceeds the amounts that is allocated for next year, and the government does want to prioritize such investments as a means of boosting potential economic growth. However, the fiscal realities of the day dictate that we scale back the allocation to a level that is fiscally justifiable, at least in the near term. The outlook for recurrent revenue in the coming fiscal year is governed to a large extent by the fiscal impact of both the revenue measures that we are proposing in this budget, as well as the impact of the rise in the rate of VAT. The lesser revenue measures include adjustments up and down, are estimated to produce a net gain in revenue of some $100 million, while the VAT increase should net new revenue to the tune of some $400 million. As a result, after factoring the growth of the economy and targeted gains from enhanced revenue collections, total recurrent revenue in 2018-19 is estimated at a level of $2,649 million, or 20.1% of GDP. That is an improvement in the revenue yield of 4 percentage points from the level of 16.1% posted in 2017-18. While still lagging behind regional norms, such a level of revenue yield is definitely more reasonable in relation to the needs of modern government and to the needs of our citizens who demand more and more services and support from the government. The GFS deficit of 2018-19 is therefore projected at $237 million, some $73 million lower than in 2017-18. At 1.8% of GDP, the deficit will come in at the target that will be mandated in the fiscal responsibility legislation. That's important, Mr. Speaker. The GFS deficit in 2018-19 is therefore projected at $237 million, some $73 million lower than in 2017-2018. At 1.8% of GDP, the deficit will come in at the target that will be mandated in the fiscal responsibility legislation. We are walking the walk, Mr. Speaker. With the decline in the size of the deficit and the ongoing growth of nominal GDP, the debt to GDP ratio is projected to fall to 56.1% in 2018-2019, down from 57.2% in 2017-2018. In the outer years of 2019-2020 and 2021, the growth of primary recurrent expenditure is being held to 2.5% per year. Recurrent expenditure from year to year is being held to 2.5% growth. As such, this category of discretionary spending will decline from 16.8% of GDP in 2018-19 to 15.4% of GDP in 2021. Capital expenditure over the forecast horizon is projected to grow by 2.5% per year. The projection for recurrent revenue beyond 2018-19 assumes that the revenue yield of the tax system remains constant at its level of 20.1% of GDP in 2018-19. On the basis of these planning assumptions, the GFS deficit in 1920 is projected at $85 million, or 0.6% of GDP. In 2020 and 2021, a GFS surplus, listen carefully so you tell the whole story. In 2021 fiscal year, a GFS surplus of some $10 million is forecasted. As such, we will readily achieve the deficit targets for those 2 years. And as I indicated when I first spoke, we will come here with a black briefcase, signaling a surplus. In addition, the debt to GDP ratio will decline steadily over the forecast period to stand at 52.1% at the end of 2020-2021. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I want to re-emphasize just how significant an event the 2018-2019 budget is in the history of fiscal management in our country. For far too long, our citizens have had to live through year after year of blatant fiscal mismanagement, inadequate budgeting, overspending beyond the fiscal means available, one deficit after another, and a burden of government debt rapidly approaching critical limits. The era of fiscal irresponsibility has come to an end. The era of fiscal irresponsibility has come to an end. And as we promised, Bahamians, fiscal discipline will henceforth prevail. With this budget, we have introduced a legally binding framework that obligates us to adhere to a mandated schedule of continuous deficit reduction, and that will prevent any future government from ever engaging in reckless fiscal management and excessive deficit financing. Our government has hit the ground running in developing this budget within the full constraints of the new fiscal responsibility legislation. Quite frankly, with the evolving fiscal pressures that we confront in respect of both recurrent and capital expenditure, the looming downward pressure on recurrent revenue, as well as the dire need to clear out the massive arrears left behind by the previous government, the task this year has been particularly challenging. Very difficult decisions have had to be made in respect of expenditure allocations, with a decisive focus on the areas of highest priority within our policy agenda. Equally difficult decisions have also had to be made in respect of revenue measures. Moving to significantly enhance the revenue yield of our tax system was not done capriciously, but rather out of a deep sense of responsibility for righting the ship of state and restoring the fiscal health of the people's government. This day of fiscal reckoning inevitably had to come and has fallen to our government to tackle it with decisiveness and determination. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to assert that we willingly took up the challenge, and that as a result of the 2018-2019 budget stands as a true testament of our resolve and determination, our commitment to the Bahamian people to restore their country to fiscal health. After all, this is the people's time, and they deserve no less than a government that is firmly and deeply committed to fiscal discipline in the management of the nation's public finances. To that end, we pray for the guidance of Almighty God, the support of the Bahamian people as we move ahead to build a better future for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bamboo Town.
There are none, Mr. Speaker.
Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General.
None.
Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions.
Peter and Marvin. Marvin and Jill.
Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills.
Peter, let Marvin go.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Police Act.
Is there a second?
Second.
You think we don't understand that?
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Harbor Duties Act.
Is It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Harbor Dues Act. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Harbor Dues Act.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Port Authorities Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Port Authorities Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Port Authorities Act.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I do move that the business of this House do continue beyond 1 p.m. today.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House extend beyond 1 p.m. this afternoon. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will extend beyond 1 p.m. this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker,
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Central and...
The member for Bamboo Town knows those matters are normally dealt with as a matter of consent. I mean, I would have no objection, but in the main, that is the way we gentlemen do things in this honorable place, Mr. Speaker. You know.
Honorable member for South and Central Andres, Mangrove Key South and Central Andres. Does the House have the consent of the opposition on this matter?
Mr. Speaker, under these conditions, I do agree with the request, yes. The member for Bamboo Town, he knows the protocol of this House, yes.
Thank you, honorable member.
But that's not an issue we need unanimous consent on.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the appropriation revenue accounts expenses 2018-2019 bill 2018.
Is there a seconder?
Second. Somebody second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue accounts for the financial year commencing the 1st of July 2018 and ending the 30th of June 2019. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2018 and ending the 30th of June 2019.
For the first reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act for the appropriation of the sums of $299,319,800 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th June 2019.
Is there a seconder? Oh, get the bill. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $299,319,808 for and towards defraying the expense of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for the capital development for the financial year ending the 30th of June 2019. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $299,319,008 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending the 30th of June 2019.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Tariff.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of custom duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff for connected purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes.
For the first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes.
leave you on your own.
How's that go, my friend?
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
For the first reading of bills,
Mr. Speaker,
I
I beg leave.
recognize the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Value Added Tax Act.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Value Added Tax Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Value Added Tax Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act.
Second, Mr. Speaker. Busy today, Mr. Clark.
You get it 10,000 steps.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act.
Second.
Financial Administration and Audit.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following act, a bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Business License Act.
Is it? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act.
Further first reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills.
None, Mr. Speaker.
Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay the following resolution. Whereas Article 129(1) of the Constitution requires the Minister of Finance before the end of each fiscal financial year to cause to be prepared annual estimates of revenue and expenditure for public services during the succeeding financial year, which shall be laid before the House of Assembly, and which estimates have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas it is necessary to undertake additional borrowings to finance the deficiency of revenue over expenditure in the 2018-19 estimates of revenue and expenditure, which have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may raise any sum of money by the creation and issuance of registered stock. And whereas from time to time the House of Assembly has approved borrowings by way of loan agreements with banks to finance approved expenditure. And whereas Section 3 of the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may borrow externally or internally any amounts not exceeding in the aggregate the equivalent of $100 million in currency of the United States of America, or such greater sums as the House of Assembly may by resolution direct, and all borrowings shall be effected and secured by the issue and sale of bonds. And whereas by Section 18 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010, number 26 of 2010, it is provided that no loan shall be raised by the government and no guarantee involving a financial liability shall be binding upon the government unless entered into with the prior approval of the House of Assembly, signified by resolution thereof. Now therefore be it resolved that this House, 1, authorizes the Minister of Finance to raise by way of loan or loans the sum of $187,233,623 in the aggregate in such currency as the minister may determine. 2, authorizes the minister to raise such amounts by way of A, the creation and issue of stock under the provisions of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362, B, loan agreements with banks, including commercial banks, on such terms as are mutually agreed, and C, the issue of bonds under the provisions of the Development Loan Act, Chapter 382, subject to the provisions that the total sum borrowed under paragraph B does not exceed the sum of $187,233,623, except debt amortization and such amounts as may be necessary to amortize or refinance existing debt, and the House receives communication from the Minister of Finance at the earliest opportunity after the apportionment among A, B, and C, and 3, approves the proceeds of the said loan being used for the purpose of defraying expenditure in the 2018-2019 estimates of revenue and expenditure in excess of revenue.
Order that the resolution be brought up. Is there a second now?
Second.
Order that the resolution be brought up. Order that the resolution do lie on the table or be tabled. Further resolutions? Member statements? Appointment? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Angleston.
Speaker, I know traditionally when the budget speech is given, you don't really get into anything too heavy, and I just want to raise an issue. I just wanted to, and I think I saw something in the papers today from the Minister of National Security, but I wanted to see whether the minister, as soon as possible, can communicate to the Parliament the assurance to allay concerns that Bahamians currently have relative to what appears to be a spate of shootings and killings as being designated as lawful killings by the police. We support the police. And so I'm not seeking to, in any shape or form, paint or color any fact, except to say there is a rising concern. And it particularly comes out of the most recent incident in the Masons Addition area. The minister is coming now. And I'm wondering if he would give this Parliament an assurance, because there is a growing fear that independence may not be systemically in the mix, that there will be independent investigations in these matters so that people do not have, or it will seek to allay what is becoming a growing fear and concern about the large, unprecedented numbers this country is seeing. And so I'm wondering whether, and of course I don't know the facts one way or the other as to what happened. I was not there and I don't know. But the numbers are unusual. And so I'm wondering if the minister would give the Parliament an assurance as to the investigations and the nature of the investigations. Now, you may have already done that in the media, because I saw something, but I did not get to read it. But I think because of the nature, the serious nature of the matter, that perhaps a statement in this Parliament would be appropriate in the circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable member for Mount Moriah, I don't know if you got the first part of the inquiry by the member for Angleston, and if you are able to or willing to comment on the question today.
As she rightly said, she's not in possession of the facts. I am not in possession of the facts. She understands that there is a process, and that process must take its course. Angleston, all right? And if you read, you would have followed up in both papers this morning that I would have made some comments. And so, listen to me, please. Okay? Listen to me, please. I'm not going to turn this into a political back and forth. All right? I take my job very seriously, and I want you to know it. I take my job very seriously. All right? And if you are insinuating, Mr. Speaker, if the member from Angleston is insinuating that something is amiss, then I would say, Mr. Speaker, that she ought to come to this House with the relevant facts, all right, and we will address it accordingly.
Who has ministerial responsibility. Speaker, I cannot allow that minister to, sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Did you recognize the honorable member for Angleston?
The member just indicated I insinuated something. I insinuated nothing. I stated the facts, and all I asked, and it's a simple issue. The simple issue is whether, if he can give an assurance that there'll be an investigation of an independent nature. That's it. That's all I ask, Mr. Speaker. Nothing more. The member doesn't have to get upset or angry or whatever. All we're asking for is an assurance on that one issue. That's all. Just a limited issue.
Honorable members.
That's all.
Yes, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. As I said before, I spoke to the papers just yesterday, reference to police shootings in general. The member from Angliston has been in government now for many years. Okay? She totally no, but listen. You asked me to respond, and so I'm speaking. So, Mr. Speaker, she clearly understands, the member from Angliston, that there is a process. Okay? A shooting takes place involving a police, a coroner's court is convened, determinations are made. From there, I am not at liberty to come into this House to speak to any matter that is currently under investigation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we've just had a budget communique, and usually during
Honorable members.
This is
Honorable members.
members.
Honorable members. The member for Bamboo Town has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, member statements are traditionally not used as a probative way to get into a discussion, and so I just like for the House to adhere to, the rules.
Yes. For the member statement, the Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros.
Mr. Speaker, today has been a day when there are some little feelings. But let's get let's go down home for a little bit. Mr. Speaker, this is a Labor Day weekend where we're going to be celebrating the father of labor, the late Sir Randall Fox. And also we have the Long Island Regatta that I would have been part of for many years, and also the noted Cat Island Rake and Scrape Festival also this weekend. But we would anticipate, amidst it all, that you would just take a short trek across the ocean to the southeast and come across the South Andros, down home, where the crabs are walking pretty well, and come down and have a good weekend in South Andros this weekend. Next year, we plan to have the hotel open, and now formerly the Emerald Palm, and the member for Freetown will give you further information in this budget communication. I'll preempt him. And so, but this is a good weekend. We want to welcome you to come down to South Andros to have yourself a good time and to get away from all the tense talk of the budget until we get to the budget in another couple of days from now. So I'm inviting all to come, all and sundry to come this weekend, but come with good behavior to South Andros. And let's have a good time, and let's have a good time for fellowship, then get back to the hard cut and thrust of political life next week. So all my colleagues who have a little plane, I see there's going to be some reduction in customs for plane, and those who could fly, well, fly this weekend. And bring the member for South Beach and Angliston. Everybody come and get a little sign in the shoe down there in the bluff or in Chem Space somewhere this weekend. Maybe the member for Carmichael, who have some friends in South Andros, would come down this weekend and have a good time. Along with the member for Marco City, my family by in-law ship, he knows the story. I will talk our personal stuff today. But I want, I want everybody to come now. So let's break the tension in here today, and we'll get back to all the hard stuff next week. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Appointments of select committees. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just wanted to certainly bring greetings to the residents of Marco City, and also to invite persons to join us at the Rake and Scrape Festival in Cat Island. As you know, this is likely to be one of the biggest festivals, working along with the local government officials, the Rake and Scrape Committee, and of course, the Member of Parliament for Cat Island as well. So we invite descendants of Cat Island and others to visit with us at the Rake and Scrape Festival and have a wonderful and a safe time. Yeah, there are several Cat Islanders in here, of course. Romy. well, I'm descended on my mother's side from New Bight, Cat Island, and of course the Bluff. So we're looking forward to having all of you come down.
Thank you. Appointment of select committees. Instruction to select committees. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings. Honorable Member for Mangrove Key, notices for future meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All thank you, Mr. Speaker. All notices standing in the name of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition remain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, let me also invite folks down to the Long Island Regatta, where I'm going to be. the member wanted to speak to it, so I'm going to. Man, my mother from South Andres and my daddy from Long Island, so I got a claim too. So I'll be in both places. But Long Island certainly will be having its regatta, and I will be there as the minister responsible for regattas, Mr. Speaker. But I do would like to inform the House that we will meet at 10 a.m. the 6th of June, Wednesday, 2018. So I do move a motion that the House adjourns until that time.
Do we have a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House adjourn to 10 a.m. the 6th of June, 2018. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Final adjournment.